Good afternoon, Congressman. My name is Jenny, and I'm also from the College of William and Mary, and I'm up here interning. And my question has to do with, you just said that there needs to be some kind of basic character in the Congress, and we read a couple of articles in preparation for this interview that said that you had never made a criticism publicly of anyone, right or left, Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you saw was the impact of this increased negative campaigning and how you have seen it change in your term or in your...
Okay, there's much more of it, but and there's some of this that goes on here where individual members go out to districts and not necessarily ads, but just make campaign speeches. They're negative about an incumbent. And I've never done that, either here or in the legislature. I hate to say,
never run a negative ad? You've never run?
No, I'm not talking about, no, I've not run a negative ad. I've run very few TV ads, as a matter of fact. But I'm talking more in terms of relationship with your colleagues. And where, you know, in the legislature, I went from minority leader to speaker. I worked rather hard to try and get us from minority to majority status. I wouldn't, as a minority leader, I would never go into a majority member's district and personally criticize that individual. I would be negative about Republicans in general, but not about that person in particular. And I just think the members need, and more of that goes on than I'd like to see. I think on both sides where members go out and they're specific in criticism of colleagues. I've always thought that hurt just sort of the basic nature of the place. And there are ways you can be critical of a group rather than individualizing it to an individual who's your colleague. And I always thought you should have great respect for your colleagues and not personalize opposition.
Thank you. I want to put another question in on a different subject so we don't leave this one out. You were an opponent of the resolution to give the president the power to use force in Iraq. Yeah. And the majority of Democrats in the House actually did vote against the war resolution, even though ultimately the Senate did vote, the majority in the Senate, not of Democrats, but it passed both houses. Your leader at the time, Dick Gephardt, was on the president's side.
Yeah.
Your whip at the time, Nancy Pelosi, was not. She was opposed.
Yeah.
What happened inside your caucus there as you all came to make your own decisions? Was there argument in the caucus? Was there tension? And was there pressure from either of them or encouragement from either of them to go on one side or the other?
You know, I don't know. I don't know that I was particularly aware. The reason I voted that way, that's what I felt, and I don't know that I was particularly impacted by the fact either way, either one of them were.
Do you think it was a vote of conscience for most members?
You know, I always hate using that word. I'm never sure what we mean by vote of conscience. It was a vote of judgment, which I think so. You know, different people came to different judgments on it.
And do you feel that at this moment you made the right judgment?
Oh yeah, history's proven that it was the right vote. You know, you never know for certain on the vote.
You're one of the few who's been able to say that.
Yeah,
so
you know,
it
you know, you make judgments, and there's people always think that we operate in the theory where we absolutely certain every vote we make is pure, you know. But there are always options. You might be wrong. But in this one, I was fairly certain I was the right vote, and history reaffirms it, I think.
Any other students with questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Zachary Britton, and I'm from Arnold and Porter. I have to say this: everything that I say has nothing to do with Arnold and Porter. It has everything to do with myself.
Okay.
I was wondering, with regards to balanced budgets, I know that you have been attributed with balancing the budget at one point in the past. I was wondering, in the future, do you foresee Congress being able to operate under a balanced budget?
I think what we did in '93 started us to the track. It came a couple of years later, but I think what we did was a big part of it. I think they got to try and get back in balance. I think it's going to be tougher than it was in '93. For a couple of reasons. We were helped somewhat in the '90s because of the change in the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. So defense spending was lower in that period of time. And the fact is that most of the Army, most of the equipment is in ruins practically because of the war in Iraq. There's going to be, I think, significant rebuilding needed in terms of acquisition in DOD. We have significantly improved salaries and benefits and health benefits in DOD, so the personnel costs are going to be higher. And the other thing is we're going to have the very quickly approaching retirement of baby boomers, which are going to add a cost that we didn't have in '93. So I think it's going to be much more difficult. I have no magic solutions for them. I think the first thing to do is quit digging the hole deeper and get some pay-as-you-go rules back in place and then start working on it. Healthcare has to be dealt with. I think the first part of healthcare you have to deal with is a question of why there's some parts of this country where healthcare is much more expensive than in the rest. And it's clearly not related to labor costs, and it's not related to quality. And you start making high-cost areas get their healthcare costs down. That is a significant impact on the cost of both Medicare and Medicaid in this country.
You had talked about, thank you very much, the performance of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, after the Homeland Security, after it was absorbed into the Department of Homeland Security. Which brings me to a question about Congress's role with respect to reacting in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. How do you think that Congress did in responding?
We've passed lots of money, and how well it's all been used, I really don't know. That's one of the things people are going to have to follow. And, I just noticed the other day there were problems with people, cut off of people who still need housing assistance. And, yeah, the Congress is going to have to look at it. I'm not ready to pass a judgment. I'm sure that, anytime you have a big emergency like that and a quick expenditure, you're going to have some funds that aren't, in hindsight, you can be critical of. It's a little different when you're doing it on the spot. So it deserves a good look.
Okay, any more students? Okay, well, I want to thank the students for their questions, and I want to ask you a few personal questions, and then we'll release you.
Okay.
You have served under many presidents. We have Carter and Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush.
Yeah.
Can you give us any insight at all into the personalities of the presidents you dealt with? Any glimpse of personality that we might not know from your point of view?
I don't know. I suppose I dealt more with Clinton. Yeah, incredibly bright person, inquisitive mind. But I don't know. I guess everybody knows that, so I don't know if that's anything unique.
But what was it? Let me just go one by one. What was your impression of Jimmy Carter? Did you have much dealing with him?
Not that much. I was a freshman. I thought just a very serious, good human being who's probably been a much better ex-president. It was sort of initiative was gone those last 2 years in some fashion.
And what about President Reagan?
Charming person, didn't know much. George Bush would have seemed like if you could afford to be in his neighborhood, make a very nice neighbor.
And this President Bush?
Hard to read. I've been there for some meetings. He's always anxious to get out of the meeting with members of Congress and leave it to either the vice president or some staff members. And Bob Byrd will call him back and make him listen for a while.
And he takes those calls.
Well, no, he gets out of the room pretty quickly. Yeah. And I never had the sense I always had a sense it's pro forma, not that much interest in what members are saying.
Now, as you look back on your own career, do you know at this point what it is that you feel proudest of, looking back?
I've been fortunate in both state and local government and federal government to have been twice involved in big budget agreements. We had the '93 budget agreement where I chaired budget committee that we've talked about. Back in Minnesota in 1971, we did a major overhaul of school finance, local government finance in 1971. Wendy Anderson was governor. The Republicans controlled both houses. I was a minority leader, and we were involved in negotiations that went on for a long period of time, where in the end we did reform. We had a huge increase in income tax, some in sales tax to reduce property taxes in the state, provide for a better formula for distribution of funding for elementary and secondary education, weighing some need base into it as well as per pupil, and providing municipal aids to mostly urbanized areas that had high-cost municipal services. It was called the Minnesota Miracle. In many ways, it's been the framework of state-local fiscal policy in the state ever since '71. So, you know, that was a highlight in '93. But I also say that of all the things I've been here was something I didn't have anything to do with. In my first session, you know, when you ask about Jimmy Carter, I sat on the White House lawn when Carter with Begin and Sadat signed the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. And I always thought in my mind, you know, this is something that might be in the history books 100 years from now. And you know, that would have been Jimmy Carter in the history books 100 years from now when the others might not be. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the reality is almost 30 years later, and I'm still not certain whether that's something that will or won't be in the history books 100 years from now. I thought it might have been the beginning of a very fundamental change in the Middle East, and all the hopes I had haven't all materialized. And I hope sometime in the future they will.
And if you have thought about this already, what is, in your mind, your biggest disappointment in your service?
Probably, we haven't been able to figure out how to deal with health care. Mm-hmm. We spent some time in Minnesota in the '70s trying to deal with health care, in part because we saw the problem of increasing uninsured. This was over 30 years ago, and tried to do some things in the state level. We actually did pass a catastrophic plan in Minnesota in the '70s that assured that nobody would be totally wiped out by a medical bill. It existed for a few years, and they got in budget crunch and was defunded. So that I haven't been involved in the details of health care here with my committees, but it's interested me for a long time, and the inability for us to find that political solution to deal with what I think is just an increasing problem in this country.
And then final question here, which we've been asking everyone. If you were to have someone describe your service, what would you like for them to say about your service here in Congress?
No. I suppose I would like to say that he tried to get into the nitty-gritty of it and make some things happen.
Excellent. That's
Thank
a
you.
very good, concise answer. Mm-hmm. And thank all of you very much. Thank you so much, Congressman Sabo.
Thank you.
It's really
Enjoyed
been a pleasure.
visiting. Thank you.